Creepy and Geeky. Welcome to Creepy and Geeky, the double feature podcast of horror and more. I'm your host, Robert, and today is part one in a four-part look at the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. On this episode, Kat Hughes returns to the show to talk about the original Nightmare on Elm Street and the 2010 remake. Kat is a freelance film critic who writes for THN, Ghouls Magazine, Film Stories, and Film Hounds, and she's the host of the new podcast, Movies with Mummy, where she talks kids' movies with her daughter, Aurora. Welcome back to the show, Kat.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, always good to have you on.
Yes, and thank you for the plug for the podcast. That's much appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you hadn't added it to the intro bit for the thing, and I was like, oh, I really want to plug that because it's very cute. As somebody who has a 2-year-old grandson, it's a neat idea that really kind of plays well. I like it. It's cute.
Yeah, it's all her idea. She obviously there's lots of times where it's like mummy's going away for a little bit. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going to do a podcast. And then she was like, "Can we do a podcast?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. We can give it a go." And yeah, so we just sit and chat about whatever film or TV show she wants to for about 5-10 minutes, and that's the show. It's very chaotic, but she's really enjoying doing it, and she's really enjoying like telling people that she's doing it. So she has set her sight on doing interviews though, which I'm not quite sure we're ready for yet.
Well, it sounds fun. I listened to the Bluey one, of course. I retweeted that one because I'm a big fan of the Bluey show. I watch it with my grandson pretty much every day, and he loves it as well. So it was a cute episode.
Yes, we like Bluey in our house as well. It was sort of something that me and my husband liked before her, and we were sort of encouraging her to get into it. But now, yeah, Bluey is just on. If she's not watching a film, then we are watching Bluey. But she gets very
Right.
particular about which episodes, so we can't just
Okay.
stick it on and just have them play. It has to be like, now I want to watch this one, and now I want to watch this one, and now I want to watch this one. So there's lots of like constantly being at the remote control, curating our own Bluey order.
Yeah, that's something that I find frustrating with the streamers currently is that you can't create a playlist of episodes. Like that would be the best thing if you can create a playlist of episodes so you could pick and choose which ones you really want to watch. That would be the best thing.
I don't know if it's the same in America, but our Disney Plus over here, it'll play something like The Mandalorian and then it'll go straight into the next episode. But when it comes to Bluey, it will play one episode and then it just stops. So you have to keep going back every 5 or so minutes. Whereas the other format that it's available on, the BBC iPlayer over here, you press play and it will just play through like all like 10, 15 episodes or whatever that it's got on there until the end. And that's so much easier because I can go and do the washing up or whatever and not have to keep running in to put on another episode or put on a specific episode.
Yeah. On our Disney Plus, it will continue episode after episode. It'll just go into the next one. But every once in a while it'll I guess not do it, and then it'll just stop and I have to keep doing it every time like that. But most of the time it actually does it one right after the other, which is nice for sure.
Definitely.
Well, that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this episode. And we're talking, like I said at the top, we're talking Nightmare on Elm Street, the original and the remake. And we're just going to go ahead and start with the original, of course, which is the best one. So this one came out in 1984, directed by Wes Craven, written and directed by Wes Craven, based on dreams and dream research that he did um, about basically, a dream demon. So we're introduced to Nancy Thompson, uh, arguably one of the best final girls of all time. And when did you first see this?
So Nightmare on Elm Street came out the year I was born, so
Okay.
it was a few years after release. I think it was, as much as I saw the Alien series and the Predator films and the Terminator films when I was aged between like 6 and 8, my mum kept Nightmare back from me. She was quite happy with like sci-fi horror, but when it came to horror, she was a
Right.
little bit more, I'm not sure if you should be watching. So I think I probably stumbled upon it when I was an early teenager, maybe like 12, 13. And it was obviously this big thing, and Freddy was this big pop culture icon. So it was watching the film that started it. And of all of the films of the ilk, like the first Halloween and the first Friday the 13th and such, this was the one that genuinely terrified me. I've never been the best sleeper. So to then be confronted with something that could hurt me when I was asleep was just really terrifying. And it didn't help that not long after I first watched it, I think one of my cats got into my bed and like shredded my bedding, and I just woke up one morning and there was claw marks like ripped that had ripped up my
Oh
bed sheet.
no.
So that didn't help. So yeah, I of all of like the big horror icons, Freddy was the one that I think scared me the most, and then I was less into watching other films in the series for a number of years because of that reason.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that would definitely do a number on you. Yeah, I was around 10 when this came out. And so I know I didn't see it in theaters. I'm sure I saw it on cable or video sometime afterward. Um, and Freddy became, like, I don't, arguably the biggest horror icon, uh, pretty much of the 80s. And it's, it kind of starts here, but it kind of gains steam through the later installments. But it's, I would say during that time period, I, like, most people, really gravitated towards, just the comedy aspect, which isn't really here in this movie. There's a little bit of it, but he doesn't get a lot of screen time. Which I found interesting, because even when watching the rest of the series, as much as he gets more screen time in the later installments, it's still very light, for somebody who's, until you get the last couple of them. But it's interesting for a character like this, to become such a huge icon that he has so little screen time. So it just speaks to the kind of the overall scariness of a character like this, somebody who can attack you in your dreams when you're at your most vulnerable, um and can do things uh to you in your dreams that you can't control. So
Yeah, he's definitely got, as sort of out there an entity as it is, a dream demon. It feels in a strange way more plausible than some of the other big killers who are out there, because if you want to avoid Michael Myers, you just stay in on Halloween. If you want to
right.
avoid Jason, maybe don't go to summer camp, but
Right.
everybody has to sleep.
Yes.
And it's that fear of, what if I go to sleep and I don't wake up? It really does sort of mess, because I think that the inspiration was, um, there was some men who this was happening to. They were going to sleep and they weren't waking
Yeah.
up, and that was one of the early genesis of the idea. And we have no control over. We have to sleep. Our brains need sleep to be able to function.
Right. Yeah, and if you're not sleeping, your body will just make you sleep. It's actually kind of jumping a little bit ahead. In the remake, they kind of talk about that a little bit more and kind of get a little deeper into it and talking about micro naps and stuff where your brain just will your brain and body will shut down and start forcing you to sleep, even if it's little bits here and there. And you kind of get that through the series. They don't really talk about it, but you do kind of get that even in this one, where um, Nancy falls in and out of sleep. The longer she's forcing herself to stay awake, the more she's going in and out, and reality and the dream world blur a lot more. So, which I found a fascinating take on all this, because it's how can you tell reality from fantasy when you're so tired like that? Because I've been, like, don't get me wrong, I've been up, I've never stayed up for like 72 hours or anything, but like when you're going on over 24 hours, your body is you're getting sluggish, you just feel just tired and just out of sorts, you feel foggy in your brain. So I can see where if you've got something stalking you in your dreams, then that's going to make things a whole hell of a lot worse. So
Yeah, I mean, having got a 4-year-old, I do sort of think that maybe what the teens should be doing, instead of like mainlining coffee as they all seem to do, is they should just like offer to go and look after like a toddler for a couple of nights, because they're probably not going to get any sleep then, be it the kids constantly calling them, or in our case, I get lots of nocturnal visits, and then therefore no space in the bed. But they are a great way to keep yourself up. But I think going through that the last few years, it does help identify with Nancy. Obviously, teens watch this film and it was like, oh, there's a scary guy and he's coming after teenagers. But then as an adult, when you have got a child to look after, or even like prior to my child, a very needy pet who won't let you sleep, you can put yourself into the shoes of Nancy and go, my God, like I kept awake and I want to sleep, but she's kind of the opposite. It's like she needs, like she wants to sleep. She could sleep, but if she sleeps, she's in peril. So it's again, it's that thing that you can put yourself in their shoes a little bit more than some of the other ones. I've never, touch wood, none of Aurora's dolls have spontaneously come to life without any batteries in them. So
I've definitely had some dolls that weren't supposed to make noises making noises when they weren't supposed to be. So that can be a little scary, especially in the middle of the night. We used to have, when my son was little, he used to have this big bird that would talk when you like squeezed its belly or squeezed its feet or something. And it in the middle of the night, randomly, nobody was awake at all, it just started talking, and we were just like, yeah, nope. Took the batteries out, threw it in the closet, was like, nope, we're done. So
that's a big no. But I do think that there is something weirdly tangible about Freddy Krueger in dreams, because we don't understand our dreams. There's plenty of psychoanalysis and things that have tried to interpret and analyze dreams, but we don't know why they happen. It's obviously our brain piecing together the day, and anxieties come out through them, but we know so little about how the brain works that why not have some entity able to be in there? I mean, bad dreams, they come from somewhere.
Dreams in general, like they still, and then that's what's interesting, is that even still to this day, like scientists, nobody really knows what dreams, like the functions of dreams. And I mean, they have theories about just reconciling the day or whatever, But as and that's what's interesting for me is like as somebody like I know I dream because I'll have vague like feelings that I dream, but I never really remember my dreams. I'm not one of those kinds of people who, oh, I woke up and had this crazy dream. I'll just wake up and go, okay, I had some kind of dream. I kind of vaguely remember dreaming about something, but so it would be Freddie would have a hard time with me because I don't remember dreaming. So that it would be definitely a different thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they haven't had any of those sorts of victims, have they, in any of the films where there was just, some victim that he just couldn't reach because
Yeah.
the brain wasn't as engaged in the dream to remember. Like he's just tormenting this person night after night and they're waking up absolutely fine. Like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
don't remember what I dreamt about last night. Um, but I am a lucid dreamer.
Okay.
So I'm such a light sleeper that even when I'm asleep, I know I'm asleep, and therefore,
Yeah.
I'll be aware if I'm dreaming, particularly in a bad dream, and I can think my way out of it. So I feel like
Interesting.
I might be. I think I might be okay against Freddie, given that
Yeah.
to be like, well, no, I'm not going to go down that corridor. I'm going to go over this way and like have a party.
One thing that I think is interesting about the series in general is that for a series that exists in dreams, we don't get a lot of fantastical imagery. You get it here and there, but by and large, it's very grounded in the earthly plane, I would say. Lots of boiler rooms, of course. You know, Lots of just stalking them in their own like keeping the dream world as close to the real world as possible, I think, to blur that line so they don't realize they're in the dream until it's too late, which I totally understand. But at a certain point, I always hope that they would branch out into just you know lots of weirdness, because dreams can be very weird, and so we don't really seem to get that in these movies at all, which I found to be interesting, that they haven't tried to do something like that yet.
Yeah, particularly the first film, it is, as you
Yeah.
say, very much what is real, what isn't. Are they in the school awake or are they in the school asleep? But I mean, I
Right.
know that a lot of my dreams can be quite mundane. I've lost track of the amount of times that in a dream I have been back at a previous job working a shift. If I could get money for all of the like shifts
The
I've
extra
done
time you've been
for,
working.
yeah,
Yeah.
for like my old local cinema and when I used to work at Blockbusters, that I've done, in my dreams. I would be a very wealthy person. So I kind of like that it does get too fantastical, especially in
Right.
the early one, because especially the dream in the school. I think that
Right.
one really lands because you think, oh, she's just in class. Yeah, they listen to the teacher, and then there's the strange things in the book, and then she sort of goes out, and then the next thing she's screaming at her desk. I quite, I quite like them being able to manifest those scares from the fact that you didn't, just like Nancy, you didn't realize that that one was a dream yet.
Right. Yeah, no, I see why they kept it like that. Like I said, I you know, going into it, and once they, you know, that was my only thing, was like once they know it's a dream, once they're in the dream and understand what's going on, that's when they should, topsy turvy it. But I get why, for sure you want to blend that reality to, keep them, off kilter for as long as possible. So I do like that aspect of it. So let's talk about Nancy herself. Like I said before, I think she's one of the best final girls of all time, because she's not like some of the final girls who just kind of run screaming and kind of blunder their way into a win. She's proactive. She's, trying to figure out what's going on. She's trying to figure out who this person is, and how to stop him. And eventually she does figure it out. And sets the booby traps and everything. She's, she's doing the whole Home Alone thing before Home Alone. Um,
Yeah.
and like I said, she's successful. She beats Freddy in the end. So I think that it's like I said, she's one of the most capable final girls in any series.
Yeah, and I think that she's also one of the more down to earth. I think again around that time, a lot of the final girls had to be the really sort of stuffy, bookish ones. And whilst Nancy is more reserved and I guess sort of like a PG-13 than Tina,
Right.
she still goes around to her friend's house where there's boys and hasn't told her parents.
Right.
And there is still that sort of rebellious streak to her. She didn't have to be the stuffy goody two shoes. And then add to that, she's got all of this family drama going on as well
Yeah.
with her parents, and then this secret. And yeah, she's quite a bolshy final girl. I like the attitude, and she's instantly all about saving her friends. She's trying to save those around her. She's telling them,
Right.
don't fall asleep. And yeah, she's got the plan and she puts it into action. She just needs a little bit of help, which
Right.
she
Which
doesn't.
nobody's giving her.
Yeah, she doesn't get because nobody else can stay awake.
Nobody
Apparently,
believes
but
her. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and then like even her friends who are going through this, they don't fully believe her. They're like, yes, there's somebody in my dreams and everything like that. But, they're just dreams. It's okay. And
yeah,
it's
we're
like,
all
no, dude, you're
dreaming
gonna
about the
die.
same we're all dreaming about the same person who we've all named with the same. We've all given exactly the same description of this man called like Freddie, but
Right.
nah, there's nothing to this. I'm sorry if my friends, if we realized that we were dreaming about the same random stranger that we'd never interacted with before, I think I'd be
Yeah.
a little bit more concerned than they seem to be.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and then that brings up, like you said, this past from the parents. This is a movie about, you know, the some would say the sins of the parents being revisited on the children. But I mean, ultimately, it's the parents who tried to do something good. And because the storyline is that Freddie was a child killer. Um, he murdered children and got arrested, taken to trial, and was let off on a technicality. And so then the parents take revenge on him, follow him to the factory that he worked at, and burned him alive, and killed him. And then Freddy comes back as this new demonic dream demon entity and is now killing their children. Something that was interesting that upon what little research I did was that there was that the all of these kids who are being attacked now, um like there was the, I guess, portion of the storyline that was taken out was that they all had older siblings that were the ones who were his original victims, and
Ah.
that's why all their parents uh, were the ones who killed Freddy. So it was an interesting little wrinkle to that they all actually had older siblings that they didn't know about.
Yeah, that is interesting, and it I guess goes to some way to explain how overprotective some of those parents are on
Yeah.
the children in this film, because some of them do leap quite quickly to boarding windows up.
Yeah. 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 And it's interesting too, because like it's with Nancy's mom when she tells her the story that, it was her that killed Freddie, that, her and her dad or whatever were the ones who, were leading the charge on that. So it's like, without, why would these parents that didn't have children who were possibly killed before, why would they be the ones to, be leading the charge for this? And so it would make sense that they all had older siblings that had been killed by him. It's interesting, and then that's when Freddie comes back for Nancy and her friends, it's because they're the last, they're some of the last of the children of Elm Street, the other children that he had yet to get to. So it's an interesting mythology that they create in this one, that flows into the later installments. So, but
it definitely set the foundation for further exploration. Obviously, some of the sequels go off in weird and wild directions, but there's enough in this original that other films throughout the series do go back to it. Obviously, the third film is, in a way,
right.
is sort of a semi-direct sequel, and then even New Nightmare, which takes a step outside of the story. There's elements, and like Freddy versus Jason links quite nicely into the original as well. So it's a testament to the writing talent of Wes Craven that there was enough in there that could produce this franchise.
Yeah. No, it's and Freddy versus Jason, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, that Freddy versus Jason is a very good distillation of both characters and their mythologies in ways that that some of their respective, and at least with Freddy's stuff, a lot of that gets deviated a bit, but Freddy versus Jason does a really good job of tying it back to all of that and cleaning up some of that nicely. So that was a episode that you and I talked about. So
yes, Freddy versus Jason. Always have time for Freddy versus Jason.
Such a good movie, such a good part of the franchise. But we get with this one, like I said before, Nancy beats him in the end, not before losing all of her friends, and including little baby Johnny Depp, in his first film role, which was interesting because he does come back later in what was it, number 6, and apparently Wes Craven wanted to get him back for New Nightmare, but he didn't. He wasn't comfortable, I guess, asking him. I guess he was a little didn't think Johnny Depp would accept coming back, but I guess they later on talked about it, and they met at some point and talked about it, and Johnny Depp would have been like, "Yeah, I would have come back right away." So it would have been an interesting concept to have him in A New Nightmare also. So but yeah, it's this is a really good movie. It's probably, for me, the strongest of the franchise. It sets a lot of things up that other movies later will pick up and expand on, or totally forget otherwise, just depending on the movies. But I would say that Friday, not Friday, the Nightmare on Elm Street series as a whole is fairly consistent. There's some glitches here and there, but they try to keep an internal consistency to the overall logic, which some series don't. So it's nice to see that that consistency through most of it, at least.
Yeah, we've definitely, prior to my daughter being born, we definitely did a day or a weekend where we went through all of the Nightmare films, and there is enough similarities to carry it through. Whereas recently I've done a rewatch of all of the Friday films, and they are all over the place. So yeah, there's consistency. Part of that is obviously that they had Robert Englund there
Yes.
throughout, sort of guiding even when Wes wasn't there. They had Robert there to help steer the ship and guide the character slightly. But yeah, it's a very, so there are always some wobbly moments in, I think, most of them. But yeah, it's a very consistent franchise in terms of its lore and its mythology, and even when it sort of reaches, it still makes sense in an odd way.
Well, that takes us to the remake. In 2010, they decided to, because it had been since 1994 was the last time they'd ever done anything, you know, directly with the franchise with a new Nightmare. I guess we could say 2003 we had Freddy versus Jason. But so in 2010 they decided, hey, let's remake it. Let's kind of um, do something where we're going to make it, go back to the basics, make it scary, because over time Freddy had started to become jokey, and a lot of people, I guess over time didn't really like that, which is fine. I get it. It made it kind of silly at times, but so they decided to go with this darker storyline, taking the bones of what was number one. It's not a straight remake. A lot of the characters have been changed. There is a Nancy, but her name's Nancy Holbrook and not Nancy Thompson in this. It's and there's some scenes here and there where they um do similar things, but they aren't direct. I wouldn't say that any of the scenes in this are direct um recreations. So they did attempt to try to make it something of their own. And I'm going to be one of the few people in the world that apparently was okay with most of this movie. There's one glaring aspect of this movie that really undermines the entire thing for me, but I think if they took that one thing out, it would be a much better and stronger movie, and we'd be talking more about sequels to this series, I think, if they had been able to do it right. So what do you think about this series or this movie as a whole?
I am a Nightmare remake apologist, I think is the
Okay.
term that's
Okay.
banded around these days. I I had a lot of fun with it. Obviously, I didn't get to see any of the original series in the cinema. I think Freddy versus Jason would have been my first Freddy film
Yeah.
in a cinema. So I was excited to get to see a Nightmare film in the cinema, and for the most part it worked for me.
Yeah.
It For me, it loses its way in maybe the last half an hour, 40 minutes. And the more I watch it, the more that that sequence, that part of the film sort of drags for me. But the opening half an hour or so, I don't have any problems with. I liked
Right.
how they kept elements from the original, but they subverted them. They give a lot of scenes that were Nancy's in the original to Chris, to the best friend character played by Katie
Yeah. Yeah.
Cassidy. And I thought that was a great way to give that character a bit more substance and to make you care a bit more about her than you perhaps do in the original. You've met her once or twice, and then she has this epic death. Don't get me wrong, in the original it's one of like the most iconic deaths in horror history, but
Right.
you don't really feel for her, whereas I feel in this one you spent that time living with that character, so you do feel a little bit more upset when she goes, especially as you know how she is gonna go.
No, I agree. I think that's what it is, an interesting aspect of the movie that we kind of follow along with Katie Cassidy's character through, the beginning. She's almost, it's almost kind of a psycho-esque
Mm.
subversion where you think she's the main character. That yes, we see Nancy as a character, but she's kind of a side character at that point. We're just getting Katie Cassidy's, we're going along with her storyline. So it's like, okay, so we're going with something different here. And then she dies, and then it switches over to Nancy, and I would argue that Rooney Mara and Kyle Gallner share the spotlight after that point. It's not really Nancy's story; it's both of their stories together. They kind of co-lead the rest of the movie together. So, which is kind of nice, especially Kyle Gallner being like this. This is one of his early horror roles, and this is he's arguably one of the uh, better, more like more consistent horror actors these days. So it's nice to see him
Yeah, definitely.
putting down his roots in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think he has top billing, if I remember correctly. It's
Uh,
him and then Rooney. I
I
guess
think so.
probably
This is
because
Rooney's
he
first
was,
movie, I think, too.
yeah. So although she's one of the main characters, he was the bigger star, having come off of a Haunting in Connecticut and a
Veronica
guest in
Mars.
on Smallville. He would have been the more prominent name.
Yeah.
But this the whole cast. As a fan of many a CW show,
Right.
um, there's a lot of talent from there. I mean, opening with Kellen Lutz, who was just out of the Twilight machine by then,
Yeah.
and plonking him straight into this nightmare in this rundown cafe, and it's a confronting opening because
Oh yeah.
he's obviously he's like the first in this group, and he's been awake for days, and he's mainlining the coffee, but he's starting to fall asleep, and he has an incident where he's dreaming and he's in the kitchen, and he gets cut with a knife, and then he kind of realizes, if I he's made that connection already, that oh crap, if something happens in my dream, I'm going to get hurt. And then in the middle of this cafe in front of several of his friends, Freddie kills him, but Freddie kills him
Yeah.
in such a way that it looks like he has taken his own life. And
Yeah.
it's such a strong opener, which I guess they're going for the strong opening that there was in the original, which comes later in the remake, but it works at showing that it is something different.
Definitely. Yeah, it just it's funny too, because I talk about this talked about this in the Friday the 13th series of episodes, about how we have in the 80s. The 80s is supposed to be known for all the gore and violence and everything, that we had the video nasties over there in the UK and everything, that it was such a big deal that, like, and looking back on it, they're fairly tame, compared to stuff like this that was in the early 2000s, which really upped the game in terms of gore and everything, and that nastiness. I would argue that a lot of these movies done by Platinum Dunes, the Nightmare remake, the Friday the 13th remake, a lot of these were so much more violent and gory than what we'd seen in the 80s. So it was definitely, comparing these two movies together, just shows that level of, how far we've come in terms of that acceptance in our horror movies.
Yeah, definitely. And see, other cast, you've got Thomas Dekker, who
Mm-hmm.
is always great in whatever he does. And then the parents, you've got Clancy Brown as,
Yes.
I mean, how can you not love Clancy Brown when he's in anything?
Right.
It's
Yeah, Clancy Brown, Connie Britton. Yeah, it's a great cast. It's a really, really fun, interesting cast. And I would say that we get a new Freddy too, with Jackie Earle Haley, who does a really good job, I would say, overall. um and the makeup effects on this one, definitely make him look, in a lot of ways, creepier, um and more burned, than than what we really had with Freddy.
yeah, I think the main reason why this film wasn't received as well as it could have been was people weren't willing to accept anybody else as Freddy. See, Robert Englund had played the part for so many years, and then even now still does conventions where he will do a shoot in the Freddy makeup, or he will have the Freddy glove even if he's not in the makeup. He's so synonymous with that character that then whoever they put in that role was going to be met with hostility for just not being Robert Englund. And I think that was the big problem. And then sort of moving on from that was the fact that they are trying to make Freddy scary again. In the first Nightmare film, I say he terrified me, the fact that this thing was just lurking in your dreams. As the series went on, he became more of a joke and almost like the Bart Simpson of horror. He was, the cool kid with all the quips. But this made him scary again, and I don't think people were ready for that. That's not what they were wanting, and I feel that is one of the main reasons why so many people say that it's terrible.
No, I can see that for sure. I know that got a lot of press back in the day, that a lot of fans were just like not happy with changing that. And Robert Englund himself said that he liked that he liked Jackie Earle Haley's performance, and thought he was a good continuation on that, a good replacement. My problem isn't necessarily with that. It's the change in the story and the change in his backstory. That is what ruins the movie and keeps it from being better than it is for me. Being that in the original conception of the story, Wes Craven had considered making him a child molester and killer, but they changed it to just being a child killer. And then in this version, they just went for straight up child molester. He didn't actually kill any of the kids; he just molested them, and that just gave it a gross feeling. That just kind of ruined it for me, especially in the end when he's taunting Nancy, and just the things he's saying were just gross. And it takes you out of the movie and just makes it just a whole different level, that I think that if they had just made him a child killer, then we can make that separation, and keep it in the way that it was. And I think that losing some of the humor did hurt it in a way too, because I think that you can balance some very dark humor into that, and make it just a tad bit more fun. And it kind of edges into that. There's things where he does make some jokes, or says a couple of funny lines right here where he's taunting them through the movie, but it's just not enough. I felt that, like, if they had tipped over into the comedy just a little bit more, not a whole lot, but just a little bit more, and taken out the child molester angle, I think that it could have worked so much better, and it would have been a much more successful movie. I think we would have had a lot more people looking back on it and going, sure, it's not Robert Englund, but it's still a good movie on its own. And I think that, for me, that, it's just that little bit that keeps it from being good.
Yeah, the switch to the child molester it does leave a bad taste, especially when within the narrative you've got Quentin and Nancy almost apologizing to him.
Yes.
Because they're like, we were only kids, we didn't know what we were saying, and as if perhaps Freddy hadn't done anything and that the children had made it up. There's a whole chunk of the story which is based around that, where they think, oh no, this wouldn't have happened to us, we were kids, we would have said something and our parents took it out of control, and oh my god, look what they did to this poor man. And then during the final act it's revealed that no, it was true, he was doing those things. But you spent so much of the film kind of backpedaling and trying to make Freddie the victim, that I think that's where the real ick comes from.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just it could have been just that much better of a movie without that angle in it. If they had taken that out and just made it like the original series in that way, still make the changes that you made to the twisting the scenes, making Katie Cassidy seem like she's the main character and everything else. I think it would have been so much a better movie. But just because of that angle, yeah, like you said, making them almost apologize to him, and it just, yeah, it takes it in weird directions that just makes it gross and not comfortable, especially there at the end.
But it does have obviously some more
Yeah,
positive moments, they say, where they're doing the research
yeah,
into the dreams, and they realize that his victims aren't like the kids of Elm Street. They're the kids from this preschool that they were all at together, and Nancy's there sort of researching into to all of them, and she's finding all these stories that they've all of these kids have met horrific deaths, and then she finds this video of one of the
yes,
victims who knows. I think that's a great sequence, where in just a couple of minutes you instantly feel for the character in that video.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there's lots of interesting little bits to it. I think he mentions and I talked about this a little bit earlier. He mentions the concept of the micronaps when Nancy and Kyle Gallner's character are talking to each other. He had been researching all that, and he we see this later on. He's trying to get his prescription for his ADHD meds that are keeping him awake. And she's in the store and she starts micronapping.
Mm,
And so there's this sequence where reality and the dream world are colliding back and forth. And it's a really fascinating sequence that I think is really well done.
yeah, and I like how they do play with different methods of staying awake as well. This is obviously, it's a remake, but this is coming after everything in the franchise. So they're not just drinking coffee, they are taking prescription medication to help them. And then eventually they move into taking shots of adrenaline to keep themselves
Yeah.
awake. I like how it progressed from that, because just drinking coffee to stay awake. I mean, I'm not, I'm caffeine free and have been for a number of years, but coffee always made me sleepy. I I know
Yeah.
it goes completely against what it's supposed to do, but if I had a cup of coffee, I'd need a nap afterwards. So
Yeah.
it was nice that it does show these other desperate measures that they're going to keep themselves awake.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's definitely, it's one of those things where when you, and this is why that I'm not a hater on remakes, that I think that if you can remake something that's given enough time, like I don't want to remake several years after something's made, but something given 10, 20, 30 years later, you can remake something and put modern sensibility, modern information into it. Then you can then change the narrative in lots of ways. You can update it in ways that the original just couldn't, and I enjoy that aspect of things, because there's always so many things where you look back on a movie that's a classic, and yeah, it's great and everything like that, but we don't have, we have other ways of staying awake now other than
Yeah,
coffee, and they had that at the time too, like they had the no dose pills and stuff, but like we have those, more than just those two things. We've got sodas, we've got, like you said, adrenaline, other prescription drugs that'll keep you wired and awake and everything, and so there's so many other things now that that we didn't consider back in the day. That it's just, it's a fun addition to it, and more research into dreaming and sleeping, and the consequences of not being able to sleep, and all this information that wasn't presented in any of the earlier movies. So that aspect is really fun. And like I said, other than the one aspect of the movie, I feel like this movie is actually really good. Like I said, the performances are really good. The storyline is generally mostly good. And I think that Jackie Earle Haley does a very good job at being Freddy. I think that if they do a new one at some point, definitely keep it to child killer. And
Yeah.
I would argue, go back to, kind of going into this dream demon aspect that we learn about, that they don't really talk about in either this remake or in the original. It's something that comes out through the rest of the series. But I like that dream demon aspect of something, either taking the form of this person of Freddy, this collective nightmare this community has, or something combining with Freddy. And so I think that's an interesting aspect that I think that any future installment should take advantage of.
Yeah, one thing that I do like about Freddy, and I think it's the thing that makes him really scary in the remake, is when it's sort of revealed that he was never trying to hurt Nancy previously in the dreams.
Right.
He was just trying to make her afraid so that she would stay awake long enough that when she fell asleep, she would be it'd be really difficult to wake her up. I thought
Yeah.
that was a really clever reveal, which goes to explain away some of it's the niggles that people have with other films in the franchise. It's like, well, how come Freddy can kind of instantly get this person, or visits them a couple of times, but it is, or it's like, if they're that's why aren't they waking up? It does go some way to explain the motive and intention behind that. So it's not near misses. Yeah. It's all been building to this other plan where you're then so tired that he has free reign because you can't fight back because you've got no energy left.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is a good point. Yeah. I do enjoy that aspect of it. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, that's really cool. All right. Is there anything that we didn't mention about either one of these that you would like to mention?
No, I mean we've touched upon Kyle, but just this is he is one of the modern sort of, I guess, Scream Kings. We've got the Scream Queens. He is one of the modern Scream Kings, and I kind of feel that he gets a lot of people assume that he dies more than he does. And I kind of feel that when you remember back to this film, you just assume that he dies because you know that in Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, it was a final girl. But here we have Quentin sort of surviving and maybe getting a date out of it. It's
right.
It's it's just worth mentioning that he does survive quite a lot, and that's good here. And that male energy is interesting because obviously the sequel focused on a male protagonist, and in the straight this has sort of brought both of them into the mix from day dot. And it would have been interesting to see where further films would have gone. Would they have stuck with these two, with one of them? Would it have gone off in a completely different group? So yeah, it's a shame we didn't get more, because I feel that the performances were there.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that it's this could have been a good start to a new updated franchise. With it, I understand why it didn't, but yeah, definitely the performances. Kyle Gallner is great in this, as he is in pretty much everything I've seen him in so far. So it's like you said, he's definitely a scream king. He's one of those actors that I really enjoy, um the fact that he is a big proponent of horror. um
Mm.
he's an actor who continues to go back to the genre, and sings its praises. And I love that, when actors are like that and really, hype up that they'll go off and do other things, and do the other movies, but they come back to horror, and horror is their home. And so, it's always nice to see that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously last year he was in Smile and
Yes.
Scream, and he's got another couple of sort of genre adjacent titles coming out. I think Mother May I is out in the States pretty soon, and that's a sort of Freudian thriller with some horror elements. So yeah, he's definitely an actor, like you say, that returns to this genre that helped build his career, because it was
Yes.
really Jennifer's Body, Haunting in Connecticut, and in a strange way, this remake that helped get him on the map and led him to some of his more indie projects that are perhaps closer to his heart. But he always returns to horror. He's not a snob. I think some people who start off in horror become snobs against horror.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Obviously Johnny Depp obviously started in the original Nightmare, and yeah, he came back and did a cameo, but there was a reason why Wes Craven was reluctant to ask him about a new
Yeah.
Nightmare, and I imagine some of that was, is is he going to be one of these pretentious people that did a horror and got a profile and has now disappeared? Like Renee Zellweger, one of her earlier
Oh
films
yeah.
was horror, and she has since made a career in the drama and rom-com arena. I'm not quite sure how up for a return to a Texas Chainsaw film she would be at this stage in her career.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. That's it's always interesting to see people who go off. I mean, even Jamie Lee Curtis, and I mentioned this, in my Halloween series, that Jamie Lee Curtis herself, she's somebody who started off very strongly in the horror genre, but then transitioned out of it and dips her toes back in. But I always feel like it's for the paycheck. It's never for the love of horror. She does it because she's going to get paid to be Laurie Strode again, and it's sure she enjoys playing that character, but you don't see her doing much horror outside of that anymore. She's very much staying away from that, and so it's always nice to see somebody like Kyle Garner or in any of these other actors, and actresses, Barbara Crampton, Phyllis Rose, all these people who've made horror their life and who constantly champion it and go back to it, and really try to show that it's a great format, to be somebody like Toni Collette. Toni Collette plays both sides of that. She
Mm.
she goes and does the dramas and the comedies and stuff like that, but comes back to horror, because horror is like a home to her. And so it's always nice to see somebody like her come back and be a strong proponent for that as well. So definitely, enjoy that aspect, when actors do that. All right. Well, why don't we let people know where they can find you online?
Yeah, so I personally am at Gizmo Shikari on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. There's links to all of my writing. And should anybody want to listen to the chaos that is me and my 4-year-old trying to talk about a film for 5 minutes, we are at Movies with Mummy on Twitter and at Movies with Mummy Pod on Instagram.
All right. Yeah, definitely go check that out. It's a fun, little chaotic podcast. And it's like she said, it's like 5 minutes. So you can give up 5 minutes of your day for that. So, all right. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's always an enjoyable time.
Thanks again to Kat for joining me. Next episode, Coming this Friday, Donna from the Dawn of the Dead podcast joins me to talk about Iron Man in the first episode in a new ongoing series on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And on Monday, Donna is back to talk about Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, and A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard, please consider giving the show 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, please share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. Music for the podcast composed by Jerry Smith. You can follow the podcast on social media at creepyandgeeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm GeekThulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more on TeePublic or by donating to the Ko-fi page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.